Paul Cézanne had an absolutely difficult personality. Sullen, full of tantrums, smelly, afraid of women, couldn't bear it if they touched him, if they just brushed by. A fanatic Catholic, obsessive, solitary, right-wing and paranoid. Enter the tortured but incredibly beautiful world of Cézanne. Cézanne is the impressionist who takes Impressionism into modern art. He takes the spontaneity and movement of Monet and puts in structure. He slows Impressionism down. He puts cerebral difficulty in with sensual pleasure. It was Picasso who looked back at Cézanne and said it wasn't Cézanne's apples, but Cézanne's anxiety that was the thing. So Cézanne is an absolute blue-chip nicist, but he's already giving you a bit of nasty in with his nice. When he was young, he was a much more horrible artist. He did psycho murder scenes like this. Impressionism liberated him from his own inner storms. In art, he could control his emotions. In life, he couldn't. Cézanne came from the town of Aix-en-Provence in the south of France. He was born in 1839 in this street, Rue de l'Opéra. When he was young, he hated his family. He feared his father. His father was uneducated but wealthy. He'd been a hat maker, made money, and then became co-boss of a successful bank. When Cézanne was 21, he painted his father in his early, marvelously grim style. His father passed on to Cézanne his own anxious, obsessive personality. The father agonized that he wasn't taken seriously by polite society because he was a self-made man and because he only married the mother of his 3 children after they were all born. Cézanne was illegitimate. Cézanne's youthful love object was Émile Zola. They were at school together in Aix. They both loved art and literature. They were both clever. They went on walks and swims together in the Provence countryside. They read each other their verses. Zola became the great realist novelist. He encouraged Cézanne, who was much braver than Cézanne. He didn't have a tyrannical father. The father wanted Cézanne to be a lawyer. Cézanne wanted to be an artist. The father finally gave in, so long as he could keep a neurotic control over his son's every movement. Cézanne lived in a hell of the mind. In fact, his first home when he lived in Paris was here in Rue d'Enfer, Hell Street. His father set him up in a room in this house. He signed on at a cheap art class, the Académie Gley, where he met Monet and the future Impressionists. He kept trying to get accepted by the Grand Academy of Fine Arts, but he kept failing. So he slunk back to Aix and worked in his father's bank. "What are you doing?" said Zola. "Get back to Paris." So he came back to the Rue d'Enfer. And this was the beginning of the double life that he was to lead for year after year, partly in Paris, partly in Aix, and miserable in both. Every year he sent paintings to the Salon, which every year rejected them. He tried to shock everyone, the Salon, the Impressionists. He got in a shock rut. The Impressionists would be at whatever hangout Manet was at in order to be near the great star. Cézanne would sit in an imploded, unwashed heap, furiously shy, and then suddenly blurt out a bit of bonhomie shattering rudeness. He once said to Manet, "I won't shake your hand, Monsieur Manet. I haven't washed for 8 days." Another time, Manet politely asked Cézanne what he was preparing for that year's Salon, and Cézanne replied, "I'm preparing a load of merde." Interesting integrity, you probably think. Sounds good. But you can imagine how tedious it probably was to have to encounter it in real life, and how you might want to avoid it and maybe see his paintings in a certain light. The weird, nightmarish things he was trying unsuccessfully at this time to get accepted by the Salon. This is one of Cézanne's takes on Manet's Déjeuner sur l'herbe, a paradise of naked women surrounding Cézanne. All our other artists in this programme had sensational love lives. Cézanne never had any love at all and remained a virgin until 1869, when he was 30, when he began an affair with the model Hortense Fiquet. They had a son also called Paul. It was him, Hortense and Paul all surviving on his allowance from his father, which he knew would be cut off if his father ever found out he had a family. '1871 sees the war with Prussia and the Commune. Cézanne's a draft dodger hiding out here in Provence. After all the burning and bloodshed in Paris, the painter Lucien Pissarro invited Cézanne to paint with him in the Paris suburbs. Pissarro on the right, Cézanne on the left. They're about to set out on a painting trip. They look sturdy and workmanlike. It was from Pissarro that Cézanne learned Impressionism. With that, the violent mood inside stayed inside, while on canvas, Cézanne started to produce something much more slow-burning. April 1874, the first Impressionist show. Invited by Monet to take part, Cézanne pays his 60-franc subscription, and amongst the works he puts in, he includes this parody of Manet. It's called A Modern Olympia. The prostitute's client is painted in. It's Cézanne with his bald head, but wearing the dandy outfit that Manet was always photographed in, clothes that Cézanne would never wear, black frock coat and cane, and on the chaise longue, the aristocratic top hat. Cézanne draws attention to himself by identifying himself with a scandalous figure, Manet. At the same time, he mocks Manet and he mocks himself. A therapist today would say it's a cry for help. Manet thinks it's rubbish. He can't bear Cézanne. One of the reasons he won't be in the first Impressionist show is Cézanne. Degas can't bear him either. No one likes him. What's the problem? Trouble at home? This is the Jas de Buffon, the Cézanne family estate just outside of Aix. Cézanne paints at the Jas. That's the top floor room his father had converted into a studio for him. That's good. What's bad is domestic life here, which is intolerable. It's all based on his father's complete irrationalism. In 1878, when Cézanne's nearly 30, his father opens a letter to him from one of the Impressionist buyers. In it, he learns that not only does Cézanne have a lover, but also a son. He decides that when Cézanne goes to Paris, he keeps several women in rooms there. He fights with Cézanne and temporarily cuts down his allowance. But years later, when Cézanne's father has a flirtation with one of the maids at the Jas de Buffon, he temporarily increases his allowance. In 1886, Cézanne is nearly 50, but still in that year, his mother and sister and his father, who's now nearly 90, are able to pressurize Cézanne for the sake of respectability to finally marry Hortense. The wedding takes place. It's a bleak event because they don't love each other. A few months later, Cézanne's father dies and Cézanne becomes a wealthy man from the inheritance. Cézanne is now the boss of the Jas. But instead of this cheering him up, he becomes convinced that his own death is drawing near and that all human interaction is futile. He lives here with his mother and sister running the household. He quite likes them, but on the whole, nobody in this family likes each other. Hortense does endless modelling sessions for Cézanne, but they have nothing in common. She hates his mother and sister. His mother and sister hate each other and hate her. She spends as much time as she can away from Aix, living in Paris with her and Cézanne's son, who's now a teenager. All the connections in this human tangle tend to be negative, suspicion and paranoia. Renoir once came down to stay at the Jas during this period, but he had to leave early, he said, because of the black avarice that reigns here. What's happening with his paintings? Well, we've reached the real Cézanne style, mature Cézanne, this titanic figure in art history. How do you make modern art that is at the same time like the old masters?
that holds together and has an impact for the ages, not just for the moment. That's the aim. Will he achieve it? That's the question. He doesn't know. He's always racked with doubts.
This is a portrait of Hortense from the 1880s. Here's another from the same time. She's hardly there in either as a personality, but both are still very moving emotionally. It's because of the tenderness. It's a dissociated thing. One state makes up for another. The schematic, anonymous cipher of a figure, emotionless. The loose paint, nuanced, melting, delicate, tender, conveying emotion instead. It's still Impressionism, but in a way that's solid as well as atmospheric. It's a mixture of Monet's darting, observant alertness to light and colour in nature, Manet's patterned arrangements, Courbet's roughness and frankness with the physical stuff of paint. A mixture of all that into a slowly built up, carefully ordered arrangement.
His art is composed and ordered, but he's even more eccentric than when he was young. He's a rebel against anything established. He suddenly becomes a devout Catholic. He goes to the Mass every Sunday at the cathedral, pays careful attention to every word of the sermon, and has his change ready for the beggars outside. He says, I want to share in what it was like to be in the Middle Ages. His painting is the most revolutionary type of art there's ever been, but he suddenly becomes politically conservative. He won't tolerate any left-wing views being expressed, even if it's people who support his art and the work of the artists that he used to like. He says the supporters of Impressionism are only intellectuals, a type he can't stand. He can't stand anyone who's only clever. He spends years being driven mad by not getting any success, and then when he gets it, it drives him mad too.
In 1886, one of the dealers of the Impressionists puts on a show of Cézanne in Paris. A few of the paintings sell to writers and poets. Degas and Renoir draw lots to see who will get the best still lives. And now there's a stream of articles in the papers. The former idiotic shocker has become a cult figure. It's a tiny cult, only artists and a few writers. The general audience still thinks Cézanne is mad. Meanwhile, the cultists go on pilgrimages to Aix to watch him work, to work with him and bring back reports of his conversations. He tells them he's looking at Poussin. Here's a picture by Poussin. He's a classicist from the 17th century. He paints idealized scenes of nature. They have biblical meanings or meanings from classical culture.
In Cézanne's time, salon art pays a false homage to this kind of thing, trivializing its greatness with salon sweetness. The salon hates Cézanne, but Cézanne wants to do something that really will connect the high Renaissance tradition of creating a marvelous illusion of reality done wholly in the studio using old master trickery. He wants to connect that with the sensations he experiences out in the marvelous raw reality of nature. I want to redo Impressionism after Poussin, he says, or redo Poussin after nature. It comes to the same thing.
Cézanne's interest in Poussin is an interest in solidity. Courbet, who Cézanne also admires, is interested in that too. But for Cézanne, who has the lesson of Monet as well as Courbet, solidity must be connected to its opposite: the fleeting, the fugitive, the changeable and the ephemeral.